first speaker is our first speaker is going to be Roxanne Kosh. Dr. Roxanne is an associate professor and chair for the Department of Media Production Management and Technology in the College of Journalism and Communications at the University of Florida. Her work centers mostly around sports media, relying on her past experience as a sports reporter and TV producer, working on international events while she lived in Paris, France. So, Dr. Kosh, I'll let you take it from here.
I did not know I was the first speaker. Thank you. So I prepared a few slides to kind of talk about global basketball and the NBA, and with a little bit of, I was born and raised in France, so at the end there's a little bit of a focus on the French events that the NBA does over there. And so if I can take through the history a little bit, basketball is a game that was invented because James Naismith wanted to have a physical activity for his students in the cold winter months in Massachusetts. And so that's kind of how it came about. The first rules were written, fairly soon after. And it really was born in the US by a Canadian, by the way. Like James Naismith is not originally American, so it's kind of like half Canadian too. And it spread really, really, really quickly with creations of leagues, the FIBA, the International Federation for Basketball. And in 1936, it was the Olympic debut in Berlin. Right before Nazi Germany became, and so what it became. And so Hitler wanted to make those games really, really big. And so those were the first games that were on television. So the fact that basketball was in those games was pretty important, even though it wasn't necessarily the most televised event back then. Fast forward, I'm just going quickly through the early growth of the game. You have the first World Cup in 1950, which happened about 20 years, well, exactly 20 years after the first World Cup in soccer from the FIFA. And just before that, the NBA had been born. So the NBA dates back to 1949 when the National Basketball League and the Basketball Association of America decided to merge. And in 1954, that's really kind of like when things accelerate because television comes in. So as Emily said, I'm in, my expertise comes from the media and communication, and the sports industry and media really kind of built each other, and especially television and sports really built each other. And so that was really a big turning point for the sports media industry, for the sports industry, for the globalization eventually of sports as well, obviously including basketball. This is not supposed to be here. This is the one. From the 1960s to the 1990s, you kind of have that growth with various things. So there's, the ABA is created to try to create a competition with the NBA. But eventually they merge because they realize that they probably hurt basketball more so than help it by having that split between the two. But with that merger also comes some rule changes, which had already happened when the NBA was first born in 1949. And so that's kind of all part of the evolution of basketball. More television, and that allows for more global talk about basketball. And so for the first time, we have a non-American who tops the draft in 1984. That's also that year that we had the Los Angeles Olympics. And those Olympics, along with the 1988 Olympics, which ended up being the first ones that allowed NBA players, and then the 1992 Olympics, which was the dream team, which people today still talk about, even if they weren't born back then. And I'll be honest, I barely remember the dream team. I was like 5 years old when that happened, but that's still like a staple
Yeah.
in my life in some ways. Uh, and so really those Olympics, with the dominance of the US team, really captured the world's attention. But at the same time, the fact that in 1984 and 1988, especially in 1988 when they lost the title, the fact that there were other teams that actually competed with the Americans before that dream team kind of came in, all of a sudden people realized, oh wait, there are people who can play basketball outside of the outside of this country, right? So that broke a lot of stereotypes about international talent, and hence a rise of international players in the NBA. And of course, that, you know, created that, put it in people's mind that, hey, there's a whole other market there. Financially, that's incredible, right? Oops, sorry. And in 1995, the NBA was one of the first leagues to launch its website. That's what it looked like. I do remember the internet looking like this. It was wild, as it says on that picture. But it was groundbreaking. It really was groundbreaking at the time. And the reason I remember it, like I said, I was born and raised in France. And so in, you know, when I was 8, 9, 10, I was a huge fan of the Chicago Bulls, because Michael Jordan was all the rage, pretty much anywhere, but especially but definitely in France. And so, that's for the first time I was able to have almost live results. I say almost because with the time difference, it was really in the morning that I checked. The games happened a lot during the night when I was sleeping as a child. And so, but when I woke up, I could go online and actually check the scores. I didn't have to wait 24 hours for me to be able to have it in a newspaper or a magazine or something like that. That was incredible to have those scores right there and then. Since then, all of that, you know, in terms of media that's created, that synergy between sports and the media industry, and with the start of the internet and the fragmentation of the media. So now you know, some people are going to be basketball fans who follow the games through betting and statistics, and maybe they're not going to watch the games all that much, but they're going to be like really close followers of the game in other ways through data. And that's a lot through the internet. You're going to have some people who stream the games live and talk about them on social media at the same time. You're going to have people who just stream the games live. You're going to have people who still watch on broadcast, traditional on television, some people who are going to go to bars, right? And so you really have that fragmentation of offerings. You can do a lot of different things. The athletes took that to heart and actually started branding for themselves. Like, it wasn't as big. It wasn't as big back in the 90s for athletes to be a whole brand. Obviously Michael Jordan was one. Even, if you go far enough back, Magic Johnson to a certain extent and all that. But the fact that athletes now have access to social media and their own public right there and then, really helped them hype up people about their own personal brand. Obviously the decision was also, you can kind of talk about it as a turning point too, because it was the first time that it became a huge event for someone to announce where they were going and everything, and with the backlash that it created. And digital engagement has really gone up tremendously in the past 10 to 15 years. The NBA bubble was not the first one to happen. The first bubble, sorry, during COVID was actually the NWSL, the National Women's Soccer League. But the NBA being a more famous league, really kind of took the light on it. And it was yet, you know, another turning point. So all of that history, really helped create a big brand for basketball abroad, for the NBA to create like a global brand for itself. But the NBA has been playing abroad for several decades now. The very first NBA game or NBA team to play abroad was 1978. They first started, the NBA teams would play abroad against local teams. That's kind of how it started. And then they started traveling with two teams so that it could be an actual NBA game. Preseason games first, which is also the NFL. We have, I think, another guest who's going to talk about that probably, but the NFL also started with exhibition games, and eventually graduated to regular season games or full-blown games. And so at this point, we have several games every single year that are played abroad. And beyond that, you also have other programs like Basketball Without Borders, which Joel Embiid came from the very first camp launched in Africa in 2003. You have NBA China, NBA India is becoming bigger as well. NBA Europe has been around for a while. And so they're for the past almost 10 years now, they've also been trying to develop high schoolers to try to really tap that talent all over the world. So really, the NBA is a global powerhouse. We were talking about over 1 billion fans. Games are on television in more than 200 countries and 60 languages. And since 1978, you have more than 200 NBA games that were played in more than 20 countries. So the NBA is a global league, a global brand, and the NBA teams themselves are also a global brand. So I put two examples here. Pretty much every single NBA team has a Twitter for France, but those are actually run by fans who are unpaid volunteers, and who wake up at like 2, 3, 4 a.m. all hours of the night to run their Twitter account, and there's a huge following. It's a whole community, and the NBA supports that by whenever those fans travel to the US, usually they get media accreditations and things like that, right? We have Chicago Factory is a fast food restaurant in Paris, close to the arena where the NBA teams play. So really, it's just known. Those teams really are global brands. In France specifically, the TV viewership has increased a ton. The past viewership online has increased even more so. And obviously, there's more and more NBA players with the 2023 and 2024 drafts both being heavy with French players. I'm not going to go over all this, but in 2024 there was an NBA game in France, and these are all the events that went around the game. It's not just a game; they bring a whole experience to Paris. And this year they're doing it for two games instead of one. So all that to say, what's the point? All that to say, there's definitely a growth in the globalization of the NBA. But it is a long and storied journey. It didn't happen overnight. It is accelerating a ton, but it's been happening for the past 50 plus years or so.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Kosh. If there are any questions, you can submit them to the Q&A portion. We'll be monitoring those. So we'll give you just a minute to do that.
I'm
Okay,
sorry,
well-
Emily, where did you say submit questions to? The chat or some?
You can do it in the chat, or there's a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Either one will work. All right, well then we will move right along to Dr. John Francis. Dr. Francis is an associate professor of strategic management at the Fowler College of Business, San Diego University, where he's directed the Aztec Consulting Program since 2013. His research focuses on corporate strategy and international business with numerous peer-reviewed publications and awards. Dr. Francis teaches at SDSU's, oh, that's my timer, I'm sorry, sports MBA program, ranked number 4 globally by Sports Business International, integrating strategic insights into sports management and international sports ventures. So, Dr. Francis, you are up.
All right, I'm going to share PowerPoint too. I don't know if that's a academic thing or what. Roxanne, thanks for starting the trend. Let me see here. Okay. My background is I'm a professor of strategy, so we kind of pride ourselves on the big picture, right? Taking the big picture. So so I'm going to do a little focus on that. Obviously, the reason we're all here is the influx of growth and everything regarding sports. And just to give a little background, we when I started teach, I was a young assistant professor. I came to SDSU. We have an incredible sports ecosystem down there, and our dean and our the manager, the owner of the Padres, were at some event, and the owner, John Moores, at the time was like, we need more business people in sports, right? We need more, higher level thinking and things. So the next thing you know, that was the genesis of our sports MBA. And in my second year at SDSU, I got recruited to teach in the program. And my area is international strategy. I did a PhD and I worked at a cyber. So I'm really familiar with all the cyber activities at Memphis, doing research on US competitiveness in the global markets. And so with that kind of young, international business background, I joined the program, and the first in my area was international strategy. And the first thing I found out was there were no materials on international strategy because it was just not really, there wasn't a lot going on in terms of sophisticated pushes by teams, leagues, etc. One of the things we did, if you think about international business, there's usually a few basic motives for why companies engage in international business. They're seeking revenues. They're looking for resources or innovation that exist in other places that don't exist in their home markets. They're looking to diversify risk. There's a lot of reasons why. One of the things that I saw early on was this idea of seeking resources. And so our program actually we take our students every year to the Dominican Republic. And at the time, all the MLB teams, when I started, all the MLB teams are building out these multi-million-dollar facilities. This is the Padres facility where we stayed. Every year we go down there and we tour around, and these folks are amazing, in terms of putting millions of dollars into their facilities. And the reason why the talent level in the MLB now, I think, is something like 35% of all MLB players come from the Caribbean. Over 100 players come from the Dominican Republic alone. So you're talking about this concentration of amazing resources in terms of talent in this one part of the world. So all MLB is going like crazy down there trying to find talent. You could put together, here in San Diego, we're really proud of our team. We had Tatis, Soto, amazing players. You could put together the best team on the planet just with Dominicans from this tiny island country, right? One of the things, and it's for me as an international business person, it was really interesting. We would tour, we would do these things. One of the things we did, we walked into the facility, and these young guys are hanging out. They had just finished up, their workouts. And some of the MBAs that we took speak Spanish, so they were talking to them. And one guy introduced himself, and I forget, it's like Jesus Valdez or something like that. And all the other players, they're all like 18, 16-year-old players, because this is early stage minor league stuff, started laughing. And to find it, we come to find out that the guy was actually there was some fraud. He wasn't actually Jesus Valdez. He was Juan Valdez, the older cousin of Jesus. And so these guys, in Major League Sports, there's a clock on development. And if you're too old, you age yourself out. So he was not 17-year-old Jesus. He was actually 23-year-old Juan, and the Padres had given him a signing bonus. And back in the day, these countries, this is one of the international business things that are fascinating. We have different levels of development in terms of institutions. And at the time, MLB was dealing with the lack of validation of age. They didn't use banks. So when they signed kids, they would give them a suitcase of cash. So, a few weeks later, they found out this $500,000, it went to a player that's kind of too old for their system, and they could not get the money back because they'd given it to him in cash, and that money had been dispersed throughout the whole community to aunts and cousins and all that stuff. So it was really interesting for me to see the challenges of professional sports organizations going international for talent, and they're having to deal with some of these cross-national issues. One of the things I always do with my classes is to talk about the differences between sports business and regular business, right? And there's a famous paper, and I've added a couple things, but these are the real differences between sports and regular businesses. In regular business, we teach about customers, and we want brand awareness and brand loyalty and things like that. And in sports, you don't want to call yourself a customer. You don't want to call your fans customers. They're not customers, they're fans. And the word fan comes from the Latin fanaticus, which means mad and crazy, right? So that's kind of the difference between regular, when I'm buying toothpaste, I'm not a mad, crazy person for toothpaste, but I am about my sports teams, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is the events themselves, the product itself is unpredictable. Even the best teams get upset. Even the best individual things happen. And so that's one of the things that drives us. When you buy a car, you don't want unpredictability. You want exactly what you get. But when it comes to entertainment, we want unpredictability. We want all kinds of things. And that's why we love it. We love sports, right? Another thing that's different about sports is there are so many stakeholders involved, right? When you produce a beer, you've got a brewery, and you kind of make the brewery and then you move it out to a bar. But in sports, it's the players, it's the coaches, it's the scouts, it's the media, it's the event management, it's the stadium stuff, it's on and on. It's the fan engagement now, it's on and on and on. So there's so many stakeholders that are part of the product, and you have to do it correctly. This stew or gumbo of things have to come together to produce something that's great for the fans. And if one or two stakeholders are missing, then it messes up the whole product. The other one that's really interesting to me is outcomes in business. We want return on investment. We want profit. And in sports, that is not, the outcome is winning. Only the business people care about the returns. Everybody else, all those other stakeholders care about winning. And sometimes those are two conflicting things. There's famous examples of the Florida Marlins. They go all in, they buy a bunch of players, and they win. At the same time, they lose money because they spent so much on salary, and they've won 2 World Series, and they lost money the year they won the World Series. So what do? They sell off all the players the next year. So they have this crazy up and down kind of thing. And so for business people, it's really challenging because you're trying to manage these competing or conflicting pressures sometimes. I wanted to, and this relates to the last one, this player salary. In regular business, this is a little from IBIS. Regular business in the entertainment sector spend about 27% on salaries. In sports, it's 64%. So salary expense, we were talking about the players and their salaries are unbelievable. And they're really the most important stakeholder because, as the old saying is, talent is what wins, right? So here's some examples of player salary by league, right? So the NBA, Roxanne, you can correct me if my data that I picked up is wrong, but the NBA is 8.3. Then you have the cricket, crazy. Indian Premier League, 5.3 million. Baseball's at 4 and on and on. You guys get the point, right? Like these players are making this talent, and this continues to go up. And it's not just, this is just salary. There's also endorsements, and you can, you can find that data out there. It's how much. And one of the things I want to point out too is these are the salary increases have increased like 1,000% in the last 15 years versus regular salaries is about 150%. So salary they're exploding at an increasing rate. One other thing I want to get into is, so we're talking about globalization. I'm broadened the topic from exports, which is one type of strategy, to more of a general globalization thing. And leagues and teams are looking at countries, and we bring in some of the same processes and thoughts about countries. There are very developed sports markets around the world. That's kind of in this yellow part here, that they have advanced infrastructure. The US, anyway, they have advanced infrastructure. You have a significant investment. You have crazy media, broadcasting and social media, on, and global influence. So there's several countries in different parts of the world that would fit into that categorization. Then you have emerging markets. I had a student who was German, and he went to work in South Africa during the World Cup. It's just amazing to see how they were trying to, this was Adidas. He worked for trying to develop this country and some of the challenges they had to deal with. But you have certain countries like that have amazing passion for sports, and their industries and leagues are developing more professionally. And then you have other countries that have potential, but they lack a lot of the infrastructure and things like that, right? Again, I'm a US guy, and my kind of training and background was US competitiveness. So I kind of look at this topic from a US kind of inside out perspective. And one of the tools we use in the US, or we use in international business, is this thing called, it's a theory about national advantage, helping businesses. And so, and it's called Porter's Diamond. And so you could take Porter's Diamond, which talks about why are some countries' businesses really successful on the world stage. So part of it is their intrinsic things inside the firm, but part of it is the fact that they come from a location, a domestic environment that really influences or pushes them. So this is my little take on Porter's Diamond and the 4 dimensions of the diamond. You can see the 4 different dimensions and just kind of walk through, because the US has an advantage when it comes from growing internationally. And I'll tell you why. If you go back to the leagues up here, right, salaries and things like that gives us a decent picture of the league. Actually, here I'm going to go here. Revenues by league, right? So I just took some of the major leagues. I tried to find 23 data, and you can see like the NFL makes about 18 billion, almost 19 billion a year. Major League Baseball and the NBA make almost 11 billion in 23. Then you've got the Premier League. And so just by revenues alone, the 4 big American leagues are dominant in terms of revenue. And so how does that play out? Let's look at and kind of understand what's going on. Number one are the factors. This is an old econ argument. Why do some countries do better than others? Well, they have amazing resources. And so this is kind of the factor condition argument that, we have infrastructure. Like there was an example of, one example of infrastructure is if you take the 50 largest stadiums in the world, 27 are in the US. We have an amazing broadcast media infrastructure. We have talent. We have a huge population of people that are extremely passionate about sports. We have capital that's investing in sports, whether it's corporate sponsors to owners, right? We have another thing in Porter's Diamond, this thing called demand conditions. So demand conditions are if factors are on the input side, demand is on the output side. And it's like, what about the demand influences? And the way we teach this is we'll go like, okay, what are the Japanese, what's their culture like? Does it influence businesses? And in Japan, they're very quality oriented. Perfectionism is their standard, so you have all these examples how the Japanese are amazing at their quality. So when they go, and the culture forces that on the companies, right? Because if you can't satisfy us, then we're not going to buy your goods. And then once the Japanese go outside their country, their quality standards are so high, they're very competitive with other countries' firms, right? Even more, they're higher quality standards, so they do quite well. So again, if you apply this to sports, we spend more money per capita on sports than any country on the planet. The French spend more money on food than any country on the planet. We spend more money on sports than any country. We love our sports. We want to be entertained. We have, I think we broke participation records last year in terms of the number of kids and people playing sports. Pickleball is the #1 growth sport in the US, as you guys all probably know that. So we have amazing demand conditions that help our firms when they go outside. This other point over here, we have an ecosystem that's unparalleled, and it goes from, it's not just the leagues themselves, but it's also the media. My son is in analytics, so all this analytics stuff, all these industries that are blowing up to help the teams, and that helps the leagues when they go abroad. And then the last thing is strategy, structure, rivalry. This is something that no other country has. Again, back to our revenue slide. When you want to get good at something, you want to compete. You have to compete. You can't play your little sister in tennis to get good at tennis. You have to play somebody better than you. And so one of the things that's a byproduct of leagues and passion in the US is we have 4 big leagues. This is major business. I forgot to mention on my first slide, sports industry now is the 9th largest industry on the planet. It's a huge industry. The numbers involved are incredible. So you have these 4 leagues here, the NBA, MLB, NFL, and hockey, and they're fighting for customers. They're fighting for dollars, right? And by the competition itself, the rivalry itself, helps you become, you get rid of stuff that doesn't work, and you keep searching and looking for things that do work. And that helps you when you go outside of your country to compete in a place that's less competitive. So if you think about other countries, their soccer leagues are #1, and then everything else is a distant second. And I think American business people in sports go, there's opportunity in these countries because there are not other major competitors. So you can get in there. Of course, now you get into the marketing stuff, which is how do you get people to not watch soccer and watch, football or basketball or whatever. But the overall, as a strategy guide, the opportunity is there, right? Because there's just one thing that you're competing with. One of the last things I want to get into, because I know I'm running out of time, is I wanted to kind of break this up real quick. When we talk about revenues, obviously you see how revenues break down. And this is also kind of evidence of more sophisticated strategic thinking by sports teams and leagues and things like it, and I get this all the time. The businesses care about ticket sales and their fans, obviously, but that's not their main revenue driver anymore. It is the broadcast media part of the business in every league. So it's much more about having something that's well done and entertaining that is broadcast. And I guess if you want to talk about this, is one reason why international sports is growing so much. From an exporting, it's really easy to broadcast. It's not like, hey, we're putting cars on ships and shipping them across an ocean. You're just sending a digital signal. And so it's an easy, low risk form of internationalization. All these other things require much more like feet on the ground kind of things. And that's what you'll see. I don't know if you guys remember the NFL and the World League of American Football, and then they changed it to NFL Europe, was feet on the ground. And it was pretty successful, but not from a business side. And so they pulled back. And now they just export, and they do some things that just like all the leagues do. But that's kind of what's happening right now. Anyway, well, the last thing I want to get into, and back to Porter's Diamond, is one of the things, this is kind of research projects that I'm doing, is it's not just the sport itself or the league or the entertainment. One of the things that's really interesting that's happening is Americans are moving internationally to own teams. So its ownership is becoming global. It's amazing. So here's my little, let me get, oh, I forget to turn this on. One of the things happening, these are this is Forbes, the most valuable teams on the planet. Only 2 international teams are in the top 10. The rest are all American teams. Again, just shows you the amount of money that's involved in sports in the US, which gives you an advantage when you go outside. One of the things, one of a byproduct of this is, if I'm rich and I want to own a team, you can't do it. It is really, nobody's selling their NFL team or their basketball. It's really, so what you have is a lot of rich people going internationally. I'm sure you guys have seen the Wrexham phenomenon. It's not just them, it's Tom Brady owns a team. And, I remember getting a call 10 years ago from a newspaper in Italy, and Americans were buying a Fiorentina. And you're like, why do these Americans want to buy our teams, and all this stuff? It's really interesting phenomenon. I think the number is something like 40% of the 96 teams in all the big leagues are owned by foreign owners, and the biggest group of foreign owners is Americans. And so Americans are moving out and we're owning things. And I think, this is my theory, is that it's that national advantage that has developed here in the US. We have a national advantage, and these owners think they can bring more sophisticated ownership practices to other countries, right? So here's the number of clubs in soccer owned by Americans. So Americans own 20 of them. I do want to throw out a little bit of personal history. I think this is really interesting. My brother-in-law bought an international soccer team. He bought York City, and I want to close it with this little idea, because there's so much opportunity. But I'm an international business scholar, and we teach about failures in international business. It happens all the time because of arrogance, overconfidence, all kinds of things that we bring, treating things like you did back in your home country. So this is my brother-in-law right here. He bought this I can't get my pointer to work. There he is. See this guy right here? That's my brother-in-law. He's a bit American. I mean, he's actually got 3 passports. He's a South African, British, and American. He married my sister-in-law, and he's a successful business guy. He bought this club back in the part of the England that he grew up in. And because he's an external outsider, he came in, and that conflicting pressure that I talked about early on, he's a business guy, very successful. But sports and fans they're not customers. It's different. And so this was actually a really, the first thing he did was, like, he looked at the style of play and he didn't like it. And he looked at other things. He started changing all kinds of stuff. He fired their manager 6 weeks into the thing. And then you got the crazy reaction from the fan base, Henderson, get out. And there's this, we call it liabilities of foreignness in international business, where you're the outsider just because you're foreign. And so it comes into play. So again, I'm kind of ending it. It's great. The opportunity is there, but he ultimately sold the club, and he went back to, kind of pulled back. And I think this is a really good warning that the things that work in international business apply to sports. It's great to have opportunities, but you have to be culturally sophisticated in terms of what you're doing, and you really have to understand that you can't treat fans like business, like customers. And there's all kinds of things. So I think you're going to see a few of these things in the future. Anyway, I think I went a little long, so I'll end it there. Thank you guys.
Thank you so much. If you all want to continue to send your questions into the chat or to the Q&A, we'll have time for Q&A after our last presentation. Our last presenter is Mr. Ben Guerrero. He is the Director of International for the Indianapolis Colts. He joined the Colts in July 2024 after spending 15 seasons in the National Hockey League. Mr. Guerrero worked in PR and communications for the Washington Capitals, San Jose Sharks, and most recently as the Vice President of Communications for the Seattle Kraken. So, Mr. Guerrero, you are up.
Thank you very much. Let me share my screen here as well, as I think PowerPoint's become a good trend here, so I might as well join in. All right. So I'm relatively new to not just the NFL, but also the Indianapolis Colts. And this is the role that I'm in was recently created in March, as a kind of response to what both Dr. Francis and Kosh have been speaking to in the international movement from professional sports. And so the NFL has been playing international games for a while now, but in 2022, they created the Global Markets Program, which essentially gives clubs the opportunity to market and to try to create brand awareness in international markets. So the way that essentially the program works is that teams can apply for regions or territories or countries that they would like to market to. And through that process, the NFL then quote awards rights to those teams for those markets, and then those teams can begin to try to openly market to those areas. So this is the third year of the program. The Colts are just joined this year as our first season, but there's 25 of the 32 NFL clubs that are a part of this program across 19 different markets. So it's really starting to explode right now. And I think the biggest draw is kind of what was talked about already, in that there's a huge opportunity internationally for American sports, specifically, and other sports besides soccer. Obviously, soccer is going to be the top dog for a long time in Europe, and if we're being honest, it's probably not going to be touched in certain countries. But there's a whole lot of other opportunities, besides the soccer side of things, and so I think teams started to realize that, and it's interesting that there's been a lot of international soccer teams doing the inverse that have been interested in America, because that's a market that they haven't tapped into. And so you can kind of see the NFL following some of the international soccer formulas on some of the processes that they've started. But anyways, the Colts began our program this year. And essentially, kind of similar to what was mentioned earlier, I think there's a lot of teams that jumped into this program early on, looking to create a profit right away, and maybe not necessarily, having all the answers. And I think it's been interesting to see the evolution over the first couple of years. I was able to watch from afar from the NHL side as teams started to play international games, started to market internationally. And then when this opportunity with the Colts came across, it was evident that the ownership here with Indianapolis took a little bit of a different approach as some other teams. Obviously, at some point, monetization is important. You can't spend the amount of money that teams do to try to market internationally without trying to turn that into some sort of profit, or at least cut some of the cost. But for us early on, we made a strategic decision to make this a long-term play, and in doing so, not even really discuss monetization in the first 2, maybe 3 years at all. We wanted to really truly learn about the markets that we were moving into, and so through the process, which started before I began here, our organization kind of identified Germany and Austria as 2 countries that they felt had a real natural connection, and so those were the 2 that they applied for and were granted rights for in March of this year. And some of the reasoning is there's over 150 companies that do work in both the Indianapolis and Indiana in general area, and Germany and Austria. So there's some natural connection there. We also have an Austrian-born player on our team, and then a German-born player on our team as well. And so there's a little bit of that natural connection there from a player side. But I think the clincher was last year, the team got an opportunity to play in Frankfurt against the New England Patriots, and our ownership got a chance to go, and like Dr. Kosh was saying, with some of the events the NBA puts on, the NFL puts on some events leading up to the game, and I think seeing the just general enthusiasm and passion of those events, and then leading into the game, and I'm sure some people maybe have seen some of the clips. Fans breaking out in spontaneous country roads songs and singing American ballads and things like that. It was, from what our ownership said, it was a completely kind of eye-opening experience. I think that was the clincher that said to our organization, we need to be a part of this program. So I think from the NFL side, a lot of teams will try to find similarities, and then it's up to the strategy. And so we've kind of taken a different approach In the first year, again, like I said, our number one goal was to learn about the market, cultural education, market research, but also getting to know what works and what doesn't work in the market. It was mentioned earlier, you can't just rinse and repeat your strategy and what you do in the United States. You can't do that in other countries and even in other cities of other countries. And so this whole first year, we've been taking trips to Germany, to various parts of the country to learn, again, not just to treat Germany as one country, but every region, every city has differences. So trying to realize that and trying to understand how we can find similarities between that and what we do now, to try to maximize our ability to create brand awareness. Also kind of creating relationship and strategies. Media RTL is the kind of the big media company in Germany that we've worked with, or we call it kind of the ESPN, I guess, of Germany. They're all over Europe as well, but Germany is the one that we've worked with extensively. We have some agencies and advisors that we work with in Germany. One of which is Bjorn Werner, who was actually a first-round draft pick of the Colts back in the mid 2010s, and his career didn't go as long as he would have liked in the U.S., but he realized early on that he had a gift, and he took that to the broadcast side of things and has created a massive following in Germany. They have the number one football podcast outside of the United States. He's on the broadcast of RTL in Germany as well, and they call him kind of the Pat McAfee of Germany, which is unique because they know each other as well. But really kind of an interesting story that he created a second career that's arguably more successful than his playing career. Part of our strategy also was the social and digital media side. Especially as we were starting things out, it was much easier and from a time perspective to start building our social media presence. In doing so, we wanted to find ways that we could leverage differentiators in the market. There's 10 teams that have rights in Germany alone, and that, along with Mexico, are the two most popular territories. So with us being one of the later teams to the party, how do we set ourselves apart? How do we differentiate? Especially, you can't control the on-field product. You can't control wins, losses, which players you have in your system. And for some teams in Germany, like the Chiefs, for example, it's fairly easy to get some eyeballs when you've won back-to-back Super Bowls and you have a fan like Taylor Swift. But there's other teams like us that, we haven't been to the playoffs in a while, and we are a smaller market in the US. So how do we set things apart? And so two areas there that we identified were Bjorn Werner, because of his relationship and his media presence that he's created there. And so, with our natural relationship with him, we added him as our ambassador for Germany and Austria. And then we actually have been putting a major emphasis on our mascot, Blue. So this is a unique thing for me. I've worked at a few other teams and in other sports, and at those teams, the mascot was kind of a secondary, something that we would use, on event days or maybe to go out in the community, but that was about it. But here in Indianapolis, their program and emphasis on the mascot program is much larger than any other team I've worked for. And you can kind of see some of that on social media. He has over 8 million followers on TikTok alone. He just became the highest followed mascot of any sport in North America across social media. So Instagram, TikTok. It's pretty crazy to see when he posts something on his social media, the engagement that we get there. In all honesty, it's oftentimes more than our main team account gets. So there's something there. And so how could we leverage that? So again, from the social media side, that was kind of our year one emphasis, was to try to build awareness and build kind of fan affinity through that social media side using Bjorn and Blue. A smaller area, but in-market activations, fan club moments. We do have some fan clubs there, but how do we create new fans? How do we, celebrate American football in general? We kind of took the side of, when we would, for example, host a pub activation or a pub party, we welcomed all NFL fans. Obviously it'd be great to have all Colts fans there, but I think as a sport in general there, it's a kind of the high tide raises all ships type of discussion where, you know, if American football is getting more eyeballs on it, it's getting more awareness, then every team has an opportunity to win from that. And so we've held events that are in partnership with other teams. We've held events that are just overall in general for American football. But we're obviously trying to get merchandise or anything with our logo out into the market through those events. And then finally, developing systems, which is, you know, with data privacy being such a huge issue nowadays, especially in Germany, the GDPR compliance has been a huge obstacle that we're trying to work through. You know, Germany has an incredibly, we'll call it an incredibly strict data privacy rule and some regulations there. So how do we leverage that, and how do we make sure that we can we're staying compliant, but also making the most of our time and our efforts from a marketing standpoint? Just a few kind of a snapshot of kind of what our timeline has looked like. You know, we started in March, we were awarded the rights, and we announced in April that we were moving into Germany and Austria. I started in July, and we had RTL actually come visit us in Indianapolis, and that was an eye-opening experience. I think the big thing from our point of view is this city, Indianapolis, really kind of shows out for their guests, and they've made sports an emphasis from a city's economic standpoint. And so hosting major events, the NFL Combine, Super Bowl, you know, NCAA basketball, you name it, this city really has embraced that more so than some others that I've worked in. And through that process, RTL was really wowed, and they actually chose our stadium to be the first place to broadcast a fully German broadcast on site in the NFL during a regular season game. They do it in the playoffs, but it was an opportunity for our city and for our team to kind of, you know, showcase what we can offer and do. And that was, you know, again, having a broadcast on national television in Germany is a huge way to create that awareness. And then we've started rolling out some kind of more grassroots marketing events, whether it be, you know, watch parties or pub takeovers. We've done some things around cities with content. We've had our mascot on trains handing out random Colts gear. Just, you know, trying different things in market. But I think the biggest thing in all of this is we hired an agency to work with our social media, so that, again, we're not just repurposing our American content, because it doesn't work. It's not the same. You know, the humor, for example, doesn't resonate the same as it does in different countries. And so making sure that we have a genuine feel on and a different feel on those platforms. It's not just regurgitating what we're doing in the US. It's creating genuine new content that's specifically for that market, and that's something that we've really tried to place an emphasis on. Going into next season and beyond, you know, we've been working with Bjorn and his team on content, but I think something that was interesting was that you know, the NFL side is like a lot of leagues. It's difficult to get some things in terms of merchandise passed, because you have so many stakeholders with massive deals that in place that they have to make sure that their risk is mitigated. And so we wanted to sell Bjorn's jersey on NFL's Europe shop, and going through that process was getting a number of stakeholders involved, but in the process, we were able to do so. And in the month of October, which is the month his jersey launched, we were given a limited amount of jersey inventory, and they sold out in 8 minutes in Germany. And it actually catapulted him to #1 of jersey sales in all of the month of October. And this is a player that hasn't played in 15 years. And you see some of the other names on this list, and it's shows you that the country loves the football, but they love the personalities of it as well. They love homegrown talent, someone that is a success story that shows that, you know, Bjorn, for example, he got his start in flag football in Germany, and I think people love that story. And so how can we do more to tell his story and to show that, you know, despite being thousands of miles away, you know, if you have that talent and work at it, there's a chance that you can also make that NFL jump. So next year, again, international games is probably the biggest, I don't want to say the easiest, but the biggest way to gain awareness. And we're We're hoping that at some point, either next year or in 3 years, we can host a game there. Obviously, our social media content continues to be high, especially with some of the personalities and engagement we've seen. We are in the beginning stages of looking at partnerships. Obviously, you know, the monetization is important, but also there's strategic partnerships that we can make. You know, we've had some content in collaboration with Bundesliga teams, with some of the European League of Football teams. So there's ways that we can try to make those connections as well. Flag football and youth football is a huge emphasis by the United States with the NFL, but it's really one of the easiest points of entry for kids in Germany, because you know, you don't need the helmets and the pads. It's a lot easier to get a football in kids' hands if you can do it through the flag side. So that's something that we're hoping to utilize next year. And then again, through different platforms are there streaming options, merchandise options, and again, we're continuing to try to take what we learned this year and now put it into play and see where we can start to grow. But I think, again, the NFL, it's been incredibly encouraging to see the importance that they've put on this program. It's definitely not something you can do without 100% buy-in, and you have to have buy-in from every department in the organization and in the league, and that's something that we have, and it's exciting to see where it goes next. I know we're running short on time here, so I want to make sure we got it in before.
All right, thank you very much. We are going to open up the floor in our last few minutes here for questions and answers. We had a few come through the chat. So if y'all want, I have colleagues who are going to read off those questions. So if you want to go ahead, please do.
We had a question for Dr. Kosh. How do international professional teams recruit U.S. college students who do not get drafted to the NBA?
Well, there's several ways, but the biggest one is like European, or not only European, but foreign teams do keep an eye on the NCAA. People know, especially people who work in the sports industry, know about the unique college sporting league that exists in the US. That's very, very US centric. No other country has university sports that are as developed as the NCAA is here. And so basically, you know, every team, whether that's the NBA or international teams, they have scouts. And so they keep an eye on the NBA. They also pay attention to post-draft analysis. They pay attention to summer camps that NBA teams do, the training camps, because there's very often undrafted players that go to the training camps. And then there's also some drafted players who might get dropped, right? And so those training camps usually are attended by international scouts. Some NCAA players may have agents with connections. The teams have sometimes invite players over for a tryout. You can have international recruiting camps. So it's a lot of the same systems that exist in the US, but just based somewhere else.
All right, thank you. We also had a question for Mr. Guerrero. Did you have any German-speaking people on your team while researching Germany? In either situation, however did not, could you explain your reasoning for the decision?
Yeah, so it was interesting. So the process started before I was here, but as I was caught up, I kind of was able to learn it. So we have an organization in Indianapolis called the International Center that helps with international business. It helps with staffing, and it helps with also helping people acclimate to, you know, if they have to move here or move overseas. So we started with them, but also having a relationship with Bjorn Werner already. We really tapped into his knowledge as well of the process, because, you know, the International Center was able to kind of guide us and was able to give us some advice from the business standpoint, the business side and the economic side. But Bjorn has that football knowledge and also the broadcasting knowledge, along with the cultural knowledge of living in Germany and being from Germany. So we used their advice very closely as we were going through this process. And actually our agencies that we work with are based in Germany as well. So because that, like I mentioned, that to us is very important. It has to feel genuine. It has to be pieces of content. It has to be a feel that works for the market. It's not, it's not the Indianapolis Colts in America trying to push our US feel. It's how can we build our brand around their culture and around kind of the things that resonate with them. So long answer, yes, we had a few people from different areas help us with that.
All right, thank you. Are there any other questions? You can either type them into the Q&A or the chat, or if you'd like to, you could raise your hand.
If I can add one thing, this is so important, being able to, and I think both of my co-panelists said that, it is so important to be able to cater to the local audience. The NBA does that very thoughtfully during the Paris games. That's what I can comment on the most because that's where I'm from. And also following up on Dr. Francis's comment about American owners, it's not just buying teams, it's also creating teams. So in Paris, the Paris Basketball Club was created by David Kahn, who's a former Timberwolves owner, I think. And there's even newer, that was 2016, 2017, there's an even newer American football team in Paris, the Musketeers, and that was created or co-created by a former NC State player. And so there's also that kind of entrepreneurship is very, very big in the US. And so there's that crop of like American entrepreneurs and who see opportunities elsewhere. And it's also cheaper to do that in France. Salaries are a lot lower in France. Cost of living is a lot lower in France, right? Like a good engineering salary in a city like New York, Los Angeles, or those big cities in the country are not going to be the same level as a good salary in Paris. A good engineering salary in Paris is like 60, 70K a year, right? That's very low when you consider that compared to like New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, the big cities in the US. So there's a ton of opportunities because also of that like purchasing power that Americans can have.
Right. Could I ask a question from the two NBA, NFL experts? What do you guys see? This is an export of sports, right? Which is a low risk, meaning like we're not feet on the ground kind of thing. But the question of the day is, when is that going to happen? When will there be teams in other parts of the world outside of the US? Is that decades from now? Does it require the, more, like Ben, you said Germany for football is fantastic in Europe, right? But you need like 3 countries or what, I don't know, that kind of thing, right? So, and the same with the NBA, are there talks about this and that kind of thing? So
I think the biggest talk is probably Jacksonville and London while they redo the Jacksonville Stadium, right? I think in the NBA, I could see something maybe in Mexico City. I think ultimately, like we're talking travel, and Ben will, whenever the Colts play abroad again, he'll get to witness that probably firsthand. But whenever you have to travel with the whole team, it's a lot. And there's a couple, if you look it up online, you can find some YouTube videos and things that some teams have posted that give some behind the scenes about that. And so doing that as part of the regular season requires a lot more logistics than what we currently have. I will say we do have teams in Canada, right? Like in the NBA, in the NHL, in the MLB. The NFL, I think, is the only one that doesn't. So there is one other country. I think Mexico is realistically probably the next one. Mexico City is what makes the most sense to me because it is an extremely populated city. for basketball at least. It's an extremely populated city. They already have NBA Mexico City games like every other year or so, and so there's that, they're kind of building that history, but I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. You know, the NFL Europe was an experiment that in the end failed, as you said. Business wise, they lost more money than the WNBA has to this day, and it only took them 4 years to lose that much money, right? So, but there is a European league. There is a European League of American Football. The International Federation of American Football is headquartered in Paris. The president of the International Federation of American Football, which successfully got the IOC to agree to have flag football in the Los Angeles games, along with the NFL's support, is French. And a lot of the board members are non-American. So it exists. It's overshadowed by soccer. It's overshadowed by tennis. It's overshadowed by rugby, in England, cricket, right? But it exists, and so I don't know that the Americans necessarily need to have like an NFL league type thing. The league exists, and I could see Americans moving in to own and to help with the development more so than the NFL creating or having a team in Europe permanently. The Jacksonville Jaguars in London for a little bit, why not? I could see that. The English really love the Jags because they play in London every single year and have for several years.
Yeah, I think it's a great point that especially just the schedule alone in the NBA. You know, I was in the NHL, which mirrors the schedule in the NBA, and the travel from a distance standpoint. You know, when I worked in a West Coast team, we lost on average 17 practice days more a year than when I worked for the team in the East. So from a competitive standpoint, just those two teams that are already in the league, you're losing 17 days of working on your craft. And if, you know, you have to then travel multiple more time zones, you know, I think it's a lot harder for an 82 game season. NFL there's still would be very difficult, but, you know, with one game a week, you know, maybe at some point, if, you know, maybe there's a room for a division there, but I think it's very difficult with not just, you know, the schedule and the time zone travel, but, you know, you're talking taxes, you're talking, you know, facilities, and do players' families want to live overseas and things like that. There's a lot that goes into it. But you know, if there was one sport that maybe, you know, NFL having a one game a week is a little bit easier than having 3-4 games a week.
Okay, if there are no more questions, we're going to get wrapped up. Thank you again to our panelists for being here today. I have been super impressed by hearing all of your all's experience, and I've learned a lot today. So thank you so much for that. The recording of this will be available, so be on the lookout for that. But again, thank you for your time today. Thank you for our co-hosts being here. Thank you for the participants. Everybody have a safe holiday season.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice to meet everybody.
Yes, you as well.